He never wanted to be remembered for the kill, not even for the jet he brought down. When people asked him in later years how a twin-engine P-38 older, heavier, and supposedly obsolete by 1945 could chase down the Luftwaffe's shimmering Me-262, he would shake his head. He'd say they were asking the wrong question, focusing on the wrong miracle. The real story, he'd tell them, was how close the P-38 came to never doing what it did that day at all. The kill wasn't the miracle. The miracle was that the airplane held together. Because by the time the squadron commander found out what he had done to the engines, it was already far too late. And by then, the only thing that mattered was that it worked. He always began the story in the same place, not in the sky, not with the dogfight, not with the jet screaming through the clouds like a silver comet. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. He started in a maintenance tent in northern Italy, a canvas cocoon that flapped in the alpine winds, a place that smelled of oil, fuel, damp wool, and fatigue, a place where secrets were born and sometimes stayed buried. He remembered the tent lights trembling overhead, hanging from frayed cords, the bulbs flickering whenever the generator coughed. The cold seeped through everything, the barrels, the toolboxes, the boxes of spare parts stamped with cryptic codes. And in the far corner, half hidden by the shadow of a wing, sat his P-38, battered, dirty, but faithful. He remembered leaning over the left nacelle, one hand steadying himself on the cowling, the other slipping a wrench into a bolt he had no authorization to touch. He whispered to the airplane the way he whispered to women, softly and with guilt, "This is going to get me court-martialed." Cold first. Not the alpine cold, though that was real enough. The metallic cold. The kind that crawls into your bones when you loosen bolts meant to be left alone. Bolts that represented rules, engineering boundaries, entire committees of men saying, "Do not cross this line." But war has a habit of redrawing lines. For weeks, they had been losing men to jets. Not always killed, sometimes merely humiliated. But humiliation in war can be more corrosive than loss. Contrary to the propaganda that would later flood the newspapers, the Me-262 was not invincible. He understood that. Every pilot did. The jet had weaknesses, miserable acceleration, delays in throttle response, engines that hated rapid power changes, and a landing pattern so predictable it bordered on suicidal. But none of that mattered if you could never get near one in the first place. The P-38 squadrons tried everything. Altitude ambushes at dawn, low-level traps that risked flying straight into flak curtains, coordinated dives where every man rehearsed the timing as if it were choreography. None of it worked with any reliability. The moment a jet pilot spotted contrails behind him, he lit his engines, held steady for a few seconds, and then simply departed. Not escaped. Departed, like a man walking briskly out of an argument he no longer found interesting. Every attempt ended the same way, with a silver arc disappearing into the far horizon and propeller fighters left panting behind. There was one mission he would never forget. They returned to base in silence. Not a single word exchanged as they taxied in. Not even jokes from the jokesters, the ones who filled silence because silence meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering. They hadn't lost a man, but they had lost something else. Pride. They'd set up the perfect intercept, perfect angles, perfect timing, perfect descent speed, and they still couldn't close the gap. That evening, he sat alone in the corner of the maintenance tent, illuminated by a single lamp that buzzed with a faint electrical hum. He opened the maintenance manual, not casually, but reverently, as if handling scripture. He studied the diagrams the way a theologian studies ancient texts, not looking for what was written, but for what was implied. What he was contemplating wasn't maintenance, it was heresy. Every pilot knew the limits. Manifold pressure thresholds, turbo supercharger redlines, intercooler temperature ceilings, detonation zones, fuel mixture boundaries, all designed not for maximum performance, but for survivability, for engines that had to last sorties, not shoot down jet aircraft. But the engineers who wrote those numbers were not here. They weren't the ones facing jets with propellers. They weren't the ones listening to the humiliation in the squadron's silence. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He turned a page, then another. He traced a line in a diagram he had seen 100 times, but never noticed. A margin number, a tiny note, a pressure differential between the turbos and the intercooler that, if tweaked, could boost the manifold pressure far beyond the listed limit. Dangerously, stupidly, possibly suicidally. He didn't speak German. He didn't know what the Luftwaffe engineers were discussing in 1943, but he understood physics. He understood air density. He understood the quasi-magical way turbochargers squeezed altitude into horsepower. And he understood instantly, deeply, that the P-38 had power that had never been unlocked. Or rather, that had been locked away deliberately. Rumours had floated around for months. Early model Lightnings had been detuned for long-distance reliability in the Pacific. Grandpa stories, men called them, but the way older pilots spoke of prototype climb rates, it made him wonder. He spent 3 days convincing himself not to try. 3 days telling himself the engineers knew more than he did. 3 days watching another P-38 come home with oil streaks down the fuselage after trying too hard to catch a jet. Then he made his decision. It took him 1 hour. Wastegates first. Just a hair tighter. A few degrees difference, enough to deceive the system into letting the turbo run harder, faster, fuller. Then the intercoolers. Cooling air in a war is a fragile thing. He made adjustments that technically weren't adjustments, just slight repositionings, subtle changes in airflow that changed the temperature curve under high power. He told himself it wasn't illegal if no one caught him. He told himself it wasn't reckless if he was the one taking the risk. But in truth, he felt like a man forging a counterfeit signature that could kill him. He worked quietly, not because he feared punishment, but because being interrupted halfway would leave the put, aircraft in a half-alive, half-dead state. He finished the modifications, reassembled the cowling, cleaned the tools, walked away as if nothing had happened. The next morning, he strapped in with a heart that felt too loud for the cockpit. He performed the run-up. Normal, so far. He advanced the throttles. The airplane pushed forward eagerly, smoothly. Then he eased into war emergency power. The gauges jumped. The airplane trembled not with danger, but with potential. He swallowed, whispered a quick apology to every crew chief he was about to deceive, and rolled onto the runway. The P-38 leapt forward, rotated earlier, climbed harder, pulled him skyward with a force he had not felt since flying trainers as a boy. At 15,000 feet, he had to remind himself to breathe. At 25,000 feet, he radioed the squadron commander. He tried to sound casual. He failed. "Sir, I think I can catch one now." He didn't explain how, didn't confess. Not yet. The confession would come later, far later, after engine inspections raised eyebrows, and the maintenance logbook began to look suspiciously like a diary written by someone hiding something. But that day's story, the one that burned into his memory forever, began with a glint in the distance. Not the jet itself at first, just the glint, like sunlight bouncing off a knife blade. Then the shape. Sleek. Predatory. The future of aviation. Slicing through the sky like a weapon designed by tomorrow. He rolled in behind the squadron. His modified engines growled. For the first time in months, the gap did not widen. It narrowed. The jet pilot spotted them. He said the man looked left just a glance. a flick of the eyes, but in that moment, they shared something that only pilots understand. The jet pilot was confused. Why was a P-38 here? How had it closed the distance? Why was this twin-engine dinosaur sitting on his tail? Confusion turned into something else. A tightening of the shoulders, a twitch of the helmet, a realization forming behind the canopy. Something is different today. That, he always said, was the moment the real story began. He said the strange thing wasn't the sight of the jet itself. They had seen me 262 seconds plenty of times by then, flashes of silver, streaks of impossible speed, the metallic howl that faded almost as quickly as it came. What struck him that morning was how unremarkable the moment felt at first. He had taken a patrol slot, climbing steadily with the modified P-38, still half convinced the engines would grenade themselves if he breathed wrong. His hands hovered close to the throttle quadrants, as if ready to catch them. The airplane still felt different, too eager, too awake, too willing to leap, and he spent the first 15 minutes waiting for the punishment he knew might come. But nothing broke. Nothing even threatened to break. The engines hummed with a tight, coiled readiness that was both exhilarating and terrifying. Manifold pressure hovered a hair beyond where it should have been possible. Turbo RPM drifted toward lines the engineers had drawn in red, not as warnings but as prayers. He had flown that airplane for nearly a year, and yet he felt like he was meeting it for the first time. He remembered thinking, maybe the manuals were written for peacetime. Maybe the limits were never the airplanes, they were the pilots. He leveled off at 27,000 feet just as the sun began painting the Alps in sheets of copper and pale gold. The horizon looked unreal, like a painting hung too carefully on the sky. And then, in that serene moment, he saw it. A small glint, not bright, not dramatic, just a faint, needle-thin shimmer far ahead, almost swallowed by morning haze. At first he assumed it was sunlight glancing off a contrail. Then it moved fast, purposeful, and the glint resolved itself into shape. He didn't need binoculars, didn't need a radio call, didn't need confirmation. A jet. No escort. No swarm of fighters around it. Just one Me-262, flying a wide, lazy turn toward the mountains, unaware that today would be different. His heart began its little drum roll. Not panic, not fear. Just the honest, physical admission that something irreversible was beginning. He eased the throttles forward. Not slamming them, he knew better now. He coaxed them, nursing the power up inch by inch, until the indicators slid into regions pilots normally avoided, in the same way sailors avoided rocks. The P-38 responded instantly. No lag, no hesitation. Just acceleration, smooth, eager, intoxicating. For the first time in the war, he felt like he was not chasing physics, but bending them. He settled behind the jet's general heading, careful not to close too quickly. He didn't want to spook it. He needed the advantage of surprise, even if the idea sounded absurd. Surprising a jet in a P-38, he remembered laughing at the thought. A short, disbelieving breath through clenched teeth. The mountains passed below like jagged teeth. Ridges flickered beneath him, shadows long and thin like stripes across the world. He adjusted mixture. Watched cylinder head temperature creep upward. Watched oil temperature follow. Watched the aircraft begin to vibrate in that subtle, telling way engines do when they're whispering. Are you sure about this? He was not sure. But he was committed. As he closed to within 2 miles, he saw the jet begin to bank again, slowly, methodically. It was on a patrol route. Routine. Predictable. A routine that would kill its pilot soon. He eased the nose down just a trace, adjusting attitude until the P-38 entered a shallow descent. The speed bled in like a tide. He would later say that the strangest part was how calm it all felt. No cinematic music, no burst of adrenaline that people expect from stories like this, just a quiet, focused certainty. as if two fate lines had finally intersected. He watched the jet's exhaust flicker faintly, two trails of shimmering heat rippling behind it. He checked range. He needed to get within 800 yards to even think about firing, 600 if he wanted certainty. But the truth was, he didn't want to fire yet. He wanted to watch. He wanted to understand what the jet pilot would do. He wanted to see the moment the impossible became the undeniable. The distance closed. He pushed the throttles another fraction forward. The engines groaned deep, throaty, dangerous. He could feel the vibration come up through the control column, into his wrists, up his arms. 20 inches more manifold pressure than the manual allowed. 30. 40. Even thinking about those numbers made his stomach turn decades later when he told the story. Because he knew, absolutely knew, that if either turbo spiked, if the intercoolers couldn't keep up, if the wastegates chose, that moment to stick the airplane would have torn itself apart. But nothing tore apart. The P-38 surged forward. He was close now. A mile. 9/10. The jet still hadn't seen him. And then the moment arrived, the moment every P-38 pilot dreamed about but almost none ever saw. The jet made a mistake. A small one. A subtle one. But fatal. It leveled out. Only for a heartbeat. Only for a breath. But that was all he needed. Jets were fast. Jets were deadly. Jets were the future. But jets could not climb hard and accelerate simultaneously. They could not turn tightly and simultaneously escape danger. They were slaves to momentum and slow, fragile throttle response. When that May 262 leveled, it surrendered the one thing it needed most, camouflage of speed. He pushed the throttles all the way into the detent, felt the engines scream in protest, felt the airframe shudder, felt his pulse go loud enough to drown out the world. The gap closed. 900 yards. 800. 7. And then it happened. The jet pilot turned his head, just slightly, just a flicker, but enough. He saw the P-38. He understood instantly. The vision must have been surreal, an older twin-engine fighter appearing behind him at a range no prop aircraft was supposed to achieve. The jet jerked into a climb, engines roaring, leaving twin vapor threads. He felt the familiar despair rising. This is where he pulls away. This is where the story ends like all the others. Except this time, the P-38 stayed with him. The engines howled like living things. The manifold pressure redlined. The airframe shook so violently he thought the wings would shear off. But the gap did not widen. It narrowed. For the first time in the war, perhaps for the first time ever, a P-38 was not falling behind a jet. It was gaining. He fired a 1-second burst. Not to hit, he was too far, but to say, "I can reach you." White tracers streaked past the jet's tail. The Me-262 banked hard, left too hard and bled speed. He followed. The chase became a spiral, two aircraft carving corkscrews across the sky. The jet, built for speed but not agility, kept trying to escape by climbing, then diving, then rolling shallowly as it sought momentum. The P-38 clung to it with a predatory focus he had never experienced. Every instinct he had honed for years, angle of attack, closure rate, throttle harmony, rudder feel became something between craft and instinct. He was flying at the edge of physics, at the edge of sanity, at the edge of the airplane's physical limits. And then, during one turn, a left-hand climbing spiral, the jet momentarily slowed, just a fraction too much. Its pilot hesitated. That was the moment. He pulled the nose up, aligned the sight, fired. He did not aim for glory. He did not aim for a perfect shot. He simply aimed as if this moment had been waiting for him long before the war even began. The 20mm cannon barked. The .50 calibers thundered. A stream of fire reached out and struck the jet's left engine nacelle. A pop, a flash, a spray of shimmering debris. The Me-262 wobbled, rolled right, recovered. But the left engine was dying, streaming smoke like a ribbon unraveling in the wind. The jet pilot tried one last trick, pushing the nose down, betting on a dive. A jet could outrun anything in a dive, normally, but damaged, losing thrust, and already behind the curve, it dove too shallow, too late, too desperate. He dropped in behind, squeezed again, and this time the rounds stitched up the fuselage, across the wing root, and into the cockpit area. The canopy shattered. The jet bucked once, and then it was done. It tilted, rolled gently onto its side, and fell, not like a machine struck down, but like something that had accepted its fate. He watched it all the way down, not out of triumph, not out of satisfaction, but because he felt he owed the pilot the dignity of witnessing his final descent. He always said he remembered the sky more than the kill, the colour of it, the thinness of the air, the strange quiet after the gunfire faded. He throttled back. The engines shuddered, coughing like animals that had been run too hard for too long. He dialed back mixture, adjusted trim, coaxed the airplane into calm. He should have been elated. He should have been terrified. Instead, he felt only one thing: relief. Because the moment the jet fell away, a new fear arrived. The fear that his airplane might now tear itself apart after the fact. He scanned the gauges. Everything was hot. Too hot. Numbers drifting into colours no pilot wanted to see. He reduced power. The engines cooled. Slowly. Protestingly. He turned toward the airfield. Halfway home, the realization struck him. He had no idea how he was going to explain any of this. The unauthorized adjustments. The missing tools. The engine hours that now made no sense. The kill that should not have been possible. But fate was not done with him, because as soon as he rolled to a stop on the pierced steel runway, canopy open, engines ticking as they cooled, he saw his squadron commander striding toward him, jaw tight, eyes narrow, expression unreadable. He saluted, tried not to look guilty, tried to pretend the engines were not smoking faintly from places engines should never smoke. The commander didn't salute back. He just said, "Lieutenant?" Behind him, the ground crew stared in stunned silence at the gauges still quivering near the red lines, the nacelles still steaming with heat, the faint smell of scorched oil drifting in the air. He swallowed. "I caught a jet, sir." The commander blinked. Twice. Slowly. Then he repeated, "Lieutenant, what the hell did you do?" He opened his mouth to speak. But the truth, the full truth, would not come until much later, because what he had really done that day was not killing a jet. He had broken the rules of physics as the manuals understood them. He had unlocked something the airplane had been forced to hide for years. He had taken a machine built with wartime fear and returned it to its prototype soul. And now he would have to explain all of it. If he could survive his engines long enough to make it to the debriefing. He said the strangest part wasn't the shouting, or even the threat of grounding. It was the silence right before everything began. He sat in the debriefing hut, still wearing half his flight gear, sweat drying cold across his back, palms stained with grime from throttles pushed far beyond their intended travel. The place smelled of stale coffee, canvas, and fear. Outside, the mechanics crawled over his P-38 like surgeons gathered around a patient who had walked into the operating room on his own two legs despite catastrophic injuries. He could hear them, the metallic clank of wrenches, the muttered curses, the disbelief in their voices. Inside, no one spoke to him. 3 officers sat across the folding table. His squadron commander, the engineering officer, and a major from group headquarters who had arrived so quickly it was as if someone had fired a flare specifically to summon him. They all stared at him the way doctors stare at a patient whose X-ray makes no sense. Not angry, not impressed, just confused. He cleared his throat. Sir, I have a kill to report. The commander didn't even blink. We'll get to that. The engineering officer interjected with a flat, exhausted tone. Why are your intercoolers glowing? He blinked. Sir. They're not glowing. Yes, Lieutenant. They are. The engineering officer leaned forward, voice rising. They're glowing like hell's own stovepipes. A mechanic knocked once on the doorframe and stuck his head inside. Sir, we pulled the plugs from the starboard engine. And? They're cooked. Completely cooked. Like they've been run 5 times past their limit. Silence. The Major spoke next. Lieutenant, before we begin, let me make this clear. Anything you say now may determine whether this incident is classified as pilot error or deliberate negligence. He swallowed. He wished years later that he'd been brave enough to tell the whole truth right then. But the truth was not a simple sentence. It was complicated. It involved risk. It involved other men's reputations. It involved a kind of wartime logic that only made sense when death sat beside you daily like an unwelcome roommate. So he said the only thing he could think to say. Sir, I caught a jet. The Major closed his eyes as if pained by the simplicity of the statement. Yes, Lieutenant, we are aware you caught a jet. No one is disputing that. He pointed toward the windows. What we want to know is why your engines look like they just completed a round trip to the moon. He shifted in his seat. He considered lying. He considered half-truths. He considered saying nothing. But the image of the Me-262 falling, the look the pilot gave him, the knowledge that the kill would change how they flew from this day forward, all of it pressed down on him until he exhaled and said quietly, I adjusted the waist gates. He braced for shouting, for someone to slam a fist on the table, for the Major to explode into fury. Instead, the 3 officers simply stared. The commander blinked slowly. You, what? He cleared his throat. Only a few turns, sir. The engineering officer whispered something that sounded like a prayer or a curse. You altered the turbo system, he said, voice hoarse. Yes, sir. Alone? Yes, sir. In the dark? Yes, sir. With no mechanic present? Yes, sir. The commander leaned back, crossed his arms. Lieutenant, do you have any idea how many ways you could have killed yourself doing that? He nodded. Yes, sir. Roughly 12. Even the Major paused at that. The commander inhaled deeply, as if preparing to deliver punishment so severe it might echo through the mountains themselves. But before he could speak, another knock came at the door. A different mechanic, grease up to his elbows, face pale. Sir, you need to come see this. The 3 officers stood. The lieutenant followed, though no one told him to. Outside, a half-circle of ground crew had formed around the P-38. The cowling lay open. The nacelles were streaked with heat discoloration, blues, purples, yellows like the metal had been licked by the tongue of a star. The turbos still ticked as they cooled. The intercoolers hissed faintly. One mechanic pointed with a trembling finger. Sir, these settings, these aren't just out of tolerance. He swallowed. These aren't possible. The engineering officer shoved past him, peering into the nacelle. Impossible, he muttered. No aircraft can. Run at these numbers without deton. He froze, because the engines had run. And not just run, they had survived. He straightened, eyes narrowing. What exactly did you adjust, Lieutenant? He explained. Not everything. But enough. The wastegate tweak, the slight modification to the intercooler intake shutters, the recalibration of the mixture linkage that allowed slightly richer flow under WEP, and most blasphemous of all, the removal of a limit governor designed to restrict turbo RPM during high-altitude climbs. The engineering officer stared at him like a man seeing someone walk on water. Do you have any idea, he whispered, how long the factory has been trying to solve this power drop at altitude. He didn't. He only knew that desperation had pushed him into places engineers never wanted pilots to go. The commander rounded on him. "Lieutenant, do you understand the situation you've put me in? If I don't ground you, Group will. If Group doesn't, the Air Force will. If they don't, the Germans might send you a thank you letter." A ripple of uneasy laughter moved through the mechanics. But the major didn't laugh. Instead, he motioned him back toward the debriefing tent. When the door closed, the tone changed. "Lieutenant," the major said quietly, "how did the airplane fly?" He blinked. "I'm sorry, sir." "Speak plainly. You pushed it harder than any man has pushed a P-38. Was it controllable?" He hesitated, then answered honestly. "Yes, sir. More than controllable. It climbed faster, held speed better, responded sharper, and for the first time it caught a jet." The major tapped his pencil against the table. The commander stiffened. "You wouldn't dare," he murmured. The major didn't look at him. "Lieutenant," the major said, "could this modification be replicated?" The commander slammed a fist down. "Absolutely not. This is a violation of—" The major raised a hand. "Could it be replicated?" he repeated. He swallowed. "Yes, sir." The room went silent. The major leaned back, exhaled, and said the sentence that changed everything. Then this conversation never happened. "You can't be serious. We have a pilot who just killed a jet," the major said calmly. "With a modification the engineering section has been trying and failing to achieve for 2 years. We are not grounding him. We are not punishing him. We are learning from him." The engineering officer leaned forward, voice sharp. "This mod is dangerous." "So is losing this war," the major replied. The commander paced, hands on his hips, wrestling between duty, fear, and the undeniable truth that hung in the room like smoke. Finally, he stopped, looked at the lieutenant, and for the first time that day, something like respect softened his face. "You didn't do this for glory, did you?" He shook his head. "No, sir." "For bragging rights?" "No, sir." "So why?" He met the commander's eyes. "Because the jets were killing us." The commander closed his eyes, nodded once, and sat heavily in the folding chair. The major spoke again, voice low. "Lieutenant, from this moment forward, you will help our engineering teams document everything you changed. You will fly only with direct authorization from me or the commander, and your modifications will be tested quietly on 1 aircraft per squadron. If they fail, this never happened. If they succeed, your modification becomes doctrine." He felt dizzy. "Sir, am I being punished?" The major actually smiled. "No, you're being classified," the commander added. "But if you ever, and I mean ever again, make an unauthorized adjustment without telling someone first, I'll personally throw you into the Alps." The lieutenant saluted. "I understand, sir." But what he didn't understand not yet was the cost. It began slowly. The first pilot to test the replicated mod blew an intercooler on climb-out. The engine survived, barely, but the pilot walked away shaken. The engineering teams refined it. The second pilot managed a full combat run with no issues. He came back grinning, breathing fast, whispering, "It's like the airplane finally woke up." Word spread quietly. Whispers among pilots, side glances among mechanics, a growing realization that something had shifted in the balance of the air war. But the lieutenant himself began paying the price. His engines degraded faster than anyone expected. Hours vanished off the logbook. Compressors needed rebalancing. Bearings wore in strange, uneven patterns that baffled the mechanics. Every flight risked catastrophic failure. He became intimately familiar with every rattle, every vibration, every subtle complaint the engines made. He said it felt like flying with wolves, powerful, loyal, dangerous creatures that could turn on you. if mistreated. But he kept flying, because each time he returned, the data grew. The engineering officer shook his head less, the commander sighed less, and the major smiled more. Then came the mission that changed everything again. A bomber group had reported jet interference along a corridor near the Danube. 2 P-38 seconds were assigned to patrol. One of them was his plane. They climbed early, reached altitude exactly when the bombers crossed the point of highest vulnerability. The air was thin, cold, and empty. Then, shimmering above the horizon, 2 jets. Not 1, 2. He radioed his wingman, "Stay high, don't chase." And he dove. The jets angled toward the bombers. He pushed throttles forward. The engines roared. And suddenly the jets weren't outrunning him. They were meeting him. For a single, impossible moment, he, flying a piston-driven fighter built in 1940, faced 2 of the most advanced aircraft on Earth head-on. He squeezed the trigger. Tracers lanced. Forward. One jet jerked. The other rolled. The formation scattered. The bombers slipped past unscathed. And in the chaos that followed, the jets fled, not lumbering away with casual superiority, but breaking off in genuine retreat. That moment, more than his first kill, convinced the commander, convinced the major, convinced the entire fighter group. The modification worked. Not safely, not comfortably, but effectively. And from that day on, the lieutenant became both a hero and a warning, the man who proved the P-38 could catch jets, and the man who proved it could only do so at terrible cost. But he didn't care about the legend. Not then, not later. The only thing he cared about, the only thing he ever claimed mattered, was that fewer bombers went down after that day. He said that was the true kill. Not the jet, not the score, not the tally mark beside his name in the squadron records. The true kill was the death of inevitability, the moment the Luftwaffe learned their jets were no longer untouchable, and the moment he realized that sometimes breaking the rules is the only way a man can do his duty. But the war had one last test for him, one final consequence, one final reckoning. Because the engines he had pushed so far for so long were about to push back. He used to say that the moment after a kill was harder than the moment before one. Not because of guilt, he never carried that kind, but because combat always felt strangely unfinished. A dogfight did not end when the enemy airplane burst into flame. It ended when you were home, engines cooling on the runway, hands finally unclenching from the throttles. Until then, anything could still go wrong. And on that day, with the May 262 burning behind him, the war made good on that promise. At first, the sky seemed calm. Nothing but ragged clouds, the haze of fuel smoke, and the fading spiral of the jet's debris. But as he pulled up from his firing run, his right engine coughed. Not a hiccup, not a stutter. A cough, a deep, mechanical shudder that felt like a fist slamming into the side of the aircraft. He didn't panic. Pilots who panicked became statistics. He adjusted the mixture, leaned a hair, richened a touch. The engine steadied. But the brief silence, that half-second drop in tone, was long enough for every warning bell in his head to start screaming. He knew what it meant. He had known since the moment he removed those panels in the tent. He had pushed the engines too far. And now? He levelled out at 19,000 feet, trying to bring the P-38 into a gentle cruise, trying to avoid stressing the engines any more than necessary. But the sky had other plans. Below him, on the deck, a line of silver glints moved east. At first he thought they were transports, or maybe bombers. Then one pulled slightly out of formation, and sunlight caught its wing in a way he recognized. Instantly. 190 seconds. A swarm of them. 6. Climbing. His breath froze. Not out of fear, but out of the cold. calculating recognition of being badly outnumbered with engines in questionable health. He wanted to break west, toward the mountains where friendly air patrols were scheduled. He wanted to run, but he couldn't. The 190 seconds weren't climbing randomly. They were converging. Their vector wasn't toward him. It was toward the crippled B-26 formation, 10 miles behind him, the same formation his squadron had been scrambled to cover before the jet appeared. He was off course now, out of position. The rest of his squadron was scattered across the sky, still chasing vapor trails from a vanished Me-262 that no longer existed. He was alone. And the bombers, all 12 of them, were about to be chewed apart. He rolled right, checked his ammo count. Low. Too low. He'd spent most of his ammunition taking down the jet. Those long bursts at extreme range, the ones you weren't supposed to take, had drained the gun bays nearly dry. He had enough left for, maybe, one good pass. Maybe. He thought about climbing away, radioing the squadron commander and letting someone else intercept. He truly did. But he knew the truth. Even if the others heard him, even if they broke off and turned back, even if they pushed their engines to the edge, they wouldn't get there in time. He would. Because he still had the modified engines. Engines that were now, judging by the occasional tremor under his seat, trying to die. "Screw it," he muttered. He shoved the throttles forward. The left engine responded smoothly. The right engine screamed. A metallic shriek vibrated through the cockpit, as if the turbine blades themselves were protesting the abuse. But the aircraft surged again, just like it had the first time he tested the modification, like it understood what was being asked of it. And then he dove. The altimeter, unwound in wide, reckless arcs. 18,000 feet, 15,000, 12,000. He felt the compressibility tug against the controls, felt the P-38's old familiar stiffness creeping in, but he did not ease up. The 190 seconds opened up on the bombers. He saw the first tracer streaks carving red lines through the sky, saw a B-26's port engine burst into flame, saw the formation tighten in instinctive fear, saw gunners trying desperately to track the attackers who were already among them. He tasted iron in his mouth. He could not wait. He could not hesitate. He lined up his guns on the trailing 190, the one still climbing, trying to position itself for a top-down slashing attack. He squeezed the trigger. Nothing. A jam. His heart stopped. He flicked the charging handle, slapped the side of the control yoke. The guns spat again, short, uneven bursts. The rounds tore into the 190's right-wing root. Fuel. Fire. A sudden bloom of orange as the fighter peeled away and fell. He didn't watch it go down. He was already turning toward the next one. The 190 leader had spotted him now. It broke from its attack run on the bombers and came straight for him. A head-on pass. The stupidest, most brutal kind. He steadied himself. Both aircraft screamed toward each other, closing at over 700 miles per hour combined. He squeezed the trigger again, sputtering fire. More jammed rounds. He cursed and aimed slightly low, trying to force the enemy to flinch. The 190 didn't flinch. It fired first. The tracers passed inches under his left boom. One tore a sliver from his wingtip. Another shot past the canopy so close he could feel the heat. Then the fighters crossed. The shockwave of passing washed over him, fluttering the control surfaces, rattling the canopy glass. He pulled up hard. The right engine protested again. A deep, metallic growl vibrated through the frame. He ignored it. The 190 rolled toward his tail. He rolled with it. Their circles tightened. The world spun in a founder's, dizzying carousel of sky and earth. He was losing. The P-38 could not outturn a 190 at this altitude, especially not with one engine threatening to fail at any moment. He needed a different tactic, so he did the reckless thing. He cut power on the right engine, not fully, just enough to force the aircraft into an unbalanced roll. The 190 pilot anticipated a standard defensive break. He expected the P-38 to bank left or right. Instead, the Lightning slid. Sideways. Ungracefully. Dangerously. The maneuver threw the 190 off. Its firing solution evaporated in an instant. It overshot. He punched the right throttle back up at the exact moment the enemy passed underneath him. The engine screamed in agony, but the aircraft obeyed. He dropped onto the German's tail. He fired again. A short burst. One of the guns jammed entirely. The others spat irregularly. But it was enough. The 190 burst into fragments as the rounds tore through its fuselage. 2 enemies down, 4 to go. He checked on the bombers. They were bleeding, literally and figuratively. One B-26 trailed smoke so thick it looked like a comet. Another was dropping altitude steadily, hydraulics shot out. And the remaining 190 seconds were regrouping. They'd figured him out now. This wasn't some stray escort fighter. This was a single, wounded predator who had managed to kill 2 of their own. They were angry. He could almost feel their formation tightening as they prepared to swarm him. He had maybe 30 rounds left, maybe 20, and his engines, especially the right one, were minutes from failing. He exhaled slowly. "Okay," he muttered. "Let's dance." The first 190 dove at him from above. He broke left, but not fully, just enough to spoil the lead of the attacker behind it. The second one overshot, cursing through the canopy. He didn't fire. He couldn't waste the ammo. Instead, he went nose up at a steep angle. Not enough to stall, but enough to make the 190 behind him hesitate. Then he chopped the right throttle again, jerking the aircraft into another ugly, destabilizing skid. The German behind him pulled up too sharply to react. He stalled. Just briefly. Just long enough. He rolled inverted, pulled the nose down, and found himself staring directly at the enemy canopy. He fired a 1-second burst. The bullets walked across the 190's spine, ripping through the cockpit. The aircraft lurched, then fell into a smoking spiral. 3 down. He didn't celebrate. The remaining 3 were not amateurs. They attacked as a coordinated trio, one pushing wide, one diving, one climbing a perfect bracket. He had nowhere to go. He punched the throttles to full. The right engine made a sound he had never heard before. Not a cough, not a shudder, a tearing sound. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.